So Moscow Mitch backs down on his threat to throw the American economy under the bus by refusing to increase the debt limit. What happened? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, maybe you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, even click that little bell that will notify you when I post something new. So the big news of the day is that Mitch McConnell has stated that he's going to allow the Democrats to pass an increase in the debt limit at least through December, giving the Democrats some needed breathing room so they can work out the details of the reconciliation package. As we know, reconciliation has been tied up in negotiations. On the one hand, you have the moderates, led by Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who want to see the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed. And on the other hand, you have progressives who are pushing for the full $3.5 trillion spending package that will invest in American families. It's President Biden's Build Back Better agenda, as you know. Well, the moderates had basically threatened to throw the entire process under the bus, and as a result, Speaker Pelosi pledged to hold a vote last week on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Well, that never came to pass because the progressives used the leverage that they have, and I applaud them for this, for saying, hey, we're not going to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill until we have agreement on the larger reconciliation package. I mean, it's just too easy to imagine the moderate senators getting everybody to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill and then taking a walk when the time comes to pass these needed investments in things like childcare and community college funding. As a result, Speaker Pelosi delayed the vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill with President Biden's support, as it turns out, to allow the moderates and the progressives to be able to try to negotiate some type of package that they can all agree on. This process is ugly, and it might upset a lot of Democrats feeling that there's too much division within our party. But the reality is, this is how legislating works. There's an old joke that there are two things you never want to see happen. One is making sausage, and the other is passing legislation. Well, the problem is, we have this legislation being developed all out in the open right now, and it's an ugly process. But that is how democracy works, I hate to say it. Now, Mitch McConnell certainly knows the damage that would happen if the debt limit was not passed, and he's basically assumed that the Democrats would not let the United States go into default. Since Treasury Secretary Yellen has warned that the United States would default by the 17th of October if we did not pass legislation to overcome the debt limit, this created a big problem for the Democrats trying to negotiate the reconciliation package. Because on the one hand, Mitch McConnell is saying, hey, pass the debt limit increase through reconciliation. You can do that without any Republican votes. And indeed, with him filibustering it, it's the only way it will get done without any Republican votes. But what that did is it created a situation where the Democrats didn't have the space they needed to try to negotiate through this complex legislation between, on the one hand, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and on the other hand, the $3.5 trillion families plan. So what are Democrats to do? Well, there have been a number of theories floated. One of the most interesting ones was floated by economist Paul Krugman, who suggested in the New York Times that the United States could just mint a $1 trillion coin. After all, the Constitution gives the United States federal government the power to mint coins in any denomination. So the U.S. government could just mint such a coin and then pay off its debts with that. Then there would be no issue with the debt limit. Another idea that's been bandied about for some time has been the theory that Nancy Pelosi has pushed, which is that under the 14th Amendment, there is a provision that does not allow anybody to disavow the debts of the United States. Well, the theory is, under that provision, the United States can't not pay its debts that are owed. So even if the debt limit is not passed, the Treasury will be under a constitutional obligation to move forward and pay these debts. But I think the issue that finally made Mitch McConnell fold was discussion about the filibuster. President Biden met with a group of Democratic senators yesterday, and when he came out of that meeting, he revealed that there was a lot of talk about carving an exception into the filibuster to address the debt limit. Certainly, this is the type of thing where there should be an exception to the filibuster. I mean, why should one party be able to filibuster using their strength as a minority group in the Senate to stop the passage over something that's really just ministerial, allowing the United States to pay its regularly occurring bills? The problem, of course, has been that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are loath to do anything with the filibuster. But apparently in this meeting, the two of them were not stating that they were opposed to the idea. After all, there already have been many exceptions carved into the filibuster, like, for example, the way that Mitch McConnell himself was able to get Justice Gorsuch appointed to the Supreme Court. But what really scares McConnell is the idea of the Democrats starting to pull together and carve exceptions into the filibuster rule. After all, it's not that big a step from saying that we're going to carve an exception so the United States can pay its debts to saying that we're going to carve an exception to deal with voting rights. Now, as you know, Senator Manchin and Senator Klobuchar had negotiated a package that would essentially be one of the most progressive pieces of voting rights legislation ever passed in the United States. This legislation would undo much of the harm that's being done at the state level by Republicans. Republicans are terrified of this kind of legislation because, as Donald Trump admitted, if everybody is allowed to vote, Republicans will never win an election again. So hearing President Biden come out and say that there was consideration of carving an exception to the filibuster, and evidence that Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema are not necessarily opposed to that idea in this case, was enough to scare Mitch McConnell into saying, hey, we need to back down on this and allow the Democrats at least enough time to negotiate their reconciliation package. By doing that, it becomes more likely then that the Democrats will just fold the debt limit in with their reconciliation package, which will likely pass later this year. As Kenny Rogers said, you have to know when to hold him and you have to know when to fold him. And apparently Mitch McConnell's a good poker player and he knew it was time to fold him. The danger that he saw if the Democrats start routinely cutting exceptions into the filibuster rule was something that was not lost on him. And he realized he had to back down before he forced the Democrats to do something like that. Well, if you agree with me or disagree with me or have any questions about this, I'd love to see your comments down below. If you could give me a like and maybe subscribe to this channel, that'd be a huge help. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.